It always starts in the quiet hours. A woman lies in bed, half asleep, trying to understand why she suddenly woke up at 3 a.m. again. The house is still. The air feels heavy, as if the night itself is holding its breath. Then she hears it. Slow, measured, footsteps in the hallway. She opens her eyes. Her heart beats once hard. She listens. Another step, then another. She reaches for her phone, but her hand trembles. She whispers a prayer under her breath, hoping the sound will steady her. Nothing changes. The footsteps stop right outside her door. Silence. She waits. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. It feels like the room is stretching around her, like time is standing still. She gathers the courage to look. She lifts her head, just enough to see the faint outline of a shadow resting near the door frame. Still, unmoving, watching. She blinks, and the shadow is gone. No footsteps, no door opening, nothing. Just the cold, empty hallway. And this is the moment she always struggles to explain. Because what she felt wasn't a dream, and it wasn't her mind playing tricks on her. A former witch once told me, "When I was in the Dark Kingdom, we called this the first signal. Most people never recognize it." The woman didn't scream. She didn't turn on the lights. She simply lay there, wide awake, knowing something had found her. And tonight, I'm going to reveal every signal just like that one. All 7 markers we used to place on someone long before they ever felt the attack. Signals hidden in ordinary moments. Signals most people overlook. Stay with me. What you're about to hear may change the way you see every night you've ever lived. Most people think spiritual attacks begin with something loud, something dramatic, something you can point to and say, "That's when it started." But it rarely works that way. In real warfare, the kind most never see, the first movements are silent, no warnings, no alarms, only small disturbances that pass like a whisper. A strange waking at the same hour, a sudden shift in the atmosphere of a room, a feeling you can't explain, but can't shake either. These moments seem harmless, and because they're small, people ignore them. But in the realm you cannot touch, these moments are anything but small. When I stood on the other side, this is the part that shocked me the most. Before anything physical happens, there are signs in the unseen realm. Markers placed with precision, assignments issued quietly, doors tested long before they are pushed open. And that's why the attack succeeds. Not because the darkness is strong, but because the person is unaware. You see, in the world I once served, nothing began with chaos. Everything began with planning, with patience, with watching. We studied people the way a soldier studies a territory. We learned their routines, their vulnerabilities, the hours they felt weakest. And when someone was chosen, we never appeared with force. We started with the smallest signs. A sudden heaviness in the chest, a cold shiver in a familiar place, an unexpected fear that feels out of character, a strange dream that feels too clear, too sharp, too targeted. These were the first steps. I remember the training vividly. We were taught, if they notice the early signs, the mission becomes harder. If they ignore them, the path to them opens. So we depended on that silence, on their disbelief, on their assumption that everything was ordinary. And because they saw nothing, they prepared for nothing. But here's the truth most people never hear. The unseen realm follows order. Nothing happens without a signal first. That's why the story of that woman at 3 a.m. matters. She didn't imagine the footsteps. She didn't imagine the shadow. She encountered the opening stage of a plan designed long before she ever woke up. And tonight, I'm going to expose it all. Not from guesswork, not from theory, but from experience. The kind of experience you only have when you once stood in the place you're now warning others about. I will show you the steps used to approach a person, the way a target is chosen, the way a door is checked, the way influence is applied without force, and the way fear is used as a signal, not to scare the victim, but to alert the kingdom that the operation has begun. These details were never meant to be spoken openly. They were designed to remain hidden so that people would stay unaware. But awareness is protection, knowledge is defense, and understanding what happens before the attack is the key to stopping it. So here's the tone for everything you're about to hear. As someone who once operated on the other side, I will reveal every hidden signal, exactly as we used them. No dramatics, no exaggeration, just the truth. Clear, simple, and precise. Because what you do with this understanding could be the difference between being caught off guard and being prepared. Now let's begin with the first signal. Before we talk about the 7 signals, you need to understand something many never hear until it is too late. The attack never begins with noise. It begins with study. In the Dark Kingdom, nothing was random. Targets were watched, observed, measured like someone examining the weak points of a wall before striking it. I remember one night, years ago, when the woman you met in the cold open wasn't the target yet. Someone else was. A man in another city. A man who prayed, but prayed without attention. He moved fast through every day of his life, thinking speed could protect him. Thinking routine was the same as strength. We studied him silently, his fears, his emotional habits, his late-night thoughts. His moments of loneliness. We learned his timings, the hours he was strongest, the hours he slipped into tired prayers, the hours he said nothing at all. People imagine spiritual warfare like a sudden storm. But in the kingdom of darkness, the strategy always begins with 3 things: distraction, exhaustion, disconnection. These 3 are the doorway. Take away a person's focus, and you weaken their hearing. Drain their energy, and you weaken their fire. Separate them from God, and you weaken their authority. This was the playbook. First, send distractions, small ones, nothing dramatic, a sudden emotional weight, a strange sadness without reason. An argument that pushes the person into silence afterward. Not guilt, just emptiness. Next comes exhaustion, not the normal kind. The kind that feels like a fog sitting on the mind. The kind that makes prayer feel heavy, like lifting a stone with your thoughts. The kind that makes you close your Bible early because your eyes keep falling shut. Then comes disconnection, spiritual numbness. Prayer becomes a routine, not a weapon. Worship becomes a memory, not a life. And the person begins to believe that nothing is happening, when in truth, everything is happening. This is how darkness moves. Quiet, patient, precise. Spirits don't attack every night. They move in cycles. Their rhythm follows the weak points of a person's life. When stress rises, when hope falls, when a person begins to question if God is listening, that is when timing aligns. I remember watching the team assigned to that man. They moved like shadows passing between shadows, never disturbing the air, never revealing their arrival. One would monitor his sleep, another would influence his mood, another would whisper thoughts into his tired mind, thoughts that felt like his own. And all of this was done without a single sound. Because darkness knows this truth. If a person senses the attack too early, they will fight back. If they remain unaware, they will accept what comes next. But the part people rarely understand is this: the attack doesn't begin with the event. It begins with the preparation. And the preparation always starts with silence. That woman you met at the beginning, the one who woke up at 3 a.m., she wasn't chosen randomly. She had been watched for weeks. Her prayer life had weakened. Her days had become long. Her nights had become lonely. She was drifting, slowly, quietly, unaware that drifting is one of the greatest dangers in spiritual warfare. The night she heard footsteps was not the first attack. It was simply the first evidence that something had already begun. Most people never feel the early parts. They only recognize the aftermath. But tonight, I'm going to do what the Dark Kingdom never wanted anyone to do. I'm going to expose their pattern, how they move, how they select, how they begin the assignment long before the person suspects anything. Because once you see the pattern, you can break it. Once you understand the playbook, you can shut every door they plan to use. And now that you know how the attack begins, we can move to the first signal. Are you ready? Signal 1 is the quietest of them all. Sudden spiritual numbness. It looks harmless, it feels simple. It arrives with no warning and pretends to be ordinary life. A person who once prayed with fire suddenly feels nothing. They sit down to pray and the words slip away. They try to worship and the song feels flat. They open the Bible and the page feels distant, like reading a story they already know but can no longer feel. It is the moment when a heart that once burned begins to cool without realizing it. And here's the part that shocks people. In the Dark Kingdom, this was always the first victory. I remember the meetings, the planning rooms, the moments when assignments were reviewed. We watched people closely, their consistency, their hunger for God, their passion in prayer. Those who were alert were difficult to approach. Their spirits were sharp. Their nights were guarded. But when someone began to drift, when their prayer life started shrinking, when they kept saying, "I'll pray later," We knew the early work was complete. One former agent once told me something I'll never forget. We used to laugh when people thought it was just stress. It was never stress. Because stress does not silence the spirit, but spiritual anesthesia does. Numbness was not an accident. It was a designed response. A way to dull the senses before the real strike. A way to close the inner hearing so the person could not discern danger. A way to place a soft blanket over the soul until the soul no longer resisted. In warfare, before a body is cut, it is numbed. Before an attack is carried out, awareness is taken. Before a gate is entered, the guard must be removed. That is exactly what numbness does, and it often starts with small shifts. A prayer skipped here, a devotion rushed there, a moment of worship postponed, a lingering exhaustion that convinces the person to do it tomorrow. But tomorrow does not come. The numbness deepens, quietly, slowly, softly, and the person begins to mistake it for normal life. They say, "I'm just tired. I'm just busy. I just need rest." But the truth is deeper. Something is pulling them inward, away from the place where strength is born. I remember watching the woman from the beginning of our story. Weeks before she heard footsteps, she experienced the first signal. She didn't notice it then. Her prayers became shorter. Her worship became weaker. Her nights became quieter. That quiet was not peace, it was detachment. Her spirit was losing sensitivity, not because she wanted distance from God, but because something was pulling the connection from her side. In the dark kingdom, numbness was our silent key. Once it turned, every other door became easier to open, because when the spirit stops feeling, the person stops fighting. And when they stop fighting, they start accepting everything that comes next. This is why many attacks feel sudden, even though they were prepared slowly. The numbness stage is the setup, the beginning of the destabilization. A person who cannot sense danger cannot resist danger. A person who cannot feel God's presence begins to assume God is far, and a person who assumes God is far opens the door for anything to enter. Signal 1 is simple, but it is deadly. Sudden spiritual numbness is not the attack, it is the anesthesia before the attack. And once it settles in, the second signal begins. Signal 2 is one most people remember clearly, but almost no one understands. Atmosphere changes. Not the kind you measure with weather, the kind you feel in your spirit before you feel it in your skin. I've seen it more times than I can count. A room can be warm, peaceful, almost comforting. And then, within seconds, something shifts. The air becomes heavier. Your breathing feels different. The silence changes texture, as if the space around you is no longer empty. When I was in the dark kingdom, we used to call this soft entry. It was the moment a spirit stepped into a room without revealing its full presence. To the normal person, it feels like a sudden chill on the back of the neck, a weight pressing on the chest, the sense that someone is standing behind you, even when you know you are alone. The feeling that the shadows in the room have moved even though nothing touched them. Most dismiss it. They say, maybe it's nothing, maybe I'm just tired. But darkness counts on that. I remember one assignment clearly, a young woman who lived alone. Her room always felt ordinary, until around 12:40 a.m. every night. Not loud, not dramatic, just a shift. She would sit up in bed because she could feel the coldness enter long before the footsteps ever came. Her curtains would sway slightly even though the windows were closed. Her own heartbeat would begin to sound louder in her ears, like it was trying to warn her. This is why Signal 2 is serious. Atmosphere changes reveal the arrival of an assignment before the assignment begins its work. And there's a reason these shifts happen most often between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. These hours are activation hours. The world is quiet. Prayers slow down, human focus weakens, and the spiritual realm becomes louder. In the Dark Kingdom, this was the window we used for almost every early-stage visitation. Not because the darkness is stronger at night, but because humans are weaker in silence. When everything is still, a person's guard drops. Thoughts wander, spiritual awareness lowers, and the spirit realm can move more freely around them. Some assignments didn't begin with whispering or dreams. They began with presence. Just standing close enough to test the spiritual temperature of the room. Close enough to measure if the person would react. Close enough to decide whether to advance or retreat. Atmosphere changes were the first clue. If the person sensed it and prayed with authority, the assignment would shrink back. If the person ignored it, pretended it was nothing, or tried to sleep through it, we saw that as permission to continue. That young woman I mentioned, the one whose curtains moved at 12:40 a.m., she eventually began to dread those moments. Not because she understood the warfare, but because her spirit knew something was entering before her mind did. Her room became a place where peace felt temporary, where silence felt loaded, where night felt longer than it should. Some of you listening know this feeling. You've walked into a room and felt something unwelcome waiting for you. You've tried to shake it off, but it stayed. You've woken up at strange hours with a sudden tension in the air. And here's the truth most people never hear. When atmosphere changes, it means the spirit realm has entered your space. Not imagination, not fear. Presence, and presence is the beginning of every deeper move that follows. This is why recognizing signal 2 matters. When you feel the atmosphere shift, you are not powerless. You are being alerted, warned, prepared. Because the next signals, they only come to those who ignore the earlier ones. And now that you understand atmosphere, we're ready for signal 3. Signal 3 is one most people never recognize until it has already done damage. It's the emotional shift, the sudden drop, no warning, no reason. You were fine, then you weren't. A weight settles on your chest, a sadness you can't explain, a frustration that feels larger than the moment, a heaviness that seems to come from nowhere. And this is where the Dark Kingdom did some of its most effective work. In spiritual warfare, the emotions are not small, they are gates. A person with steady emotions can pray with clarity, but a person who is sinking emotionally struggles to even find the words. And that was always the goal. Reduce the strength, weaken the focus, lower the spiritual guard. When I was inside the Dark Kingdom, I saw how emotional warfare was used like a tool. It wasn't always dramatic. Often it was subtle. A whisper at the edge of the mind. A memory suddenly pulled forward to disturb the peace. A feeling of being overwhelmed, as if life had become too heavy in a single moment. And once that drop happened, the person would begin to agree with the feeling. I'm tired. I'm done. I can't do this. No one cares. This is too much. What's the point of praying? Agreement is the danger. Because once a person agrees with the emotional attack, it becomes harder to break. I remember a woman named Ada, a strong believer. A woman whose prayer life once carried fire. But she entered a season where she felt isolated. Her days were long, her nights were longer. And the moment she grew tired emotionally, the assignment found her. I remember watching the spirit assigned to her. It didn't rush. It didn't force. It simply waited for the right moment. Late one evening, she sat in her room, scrolling through her phone. A small thought entered her mind. Just one. You're alone. She didn't argue. She didn't reject it. She let the thought sit. That was all the spirit needed. Within minutes, she felt a heaviness fall on her shoulders, a sadness that made her chest tighten. A wave of irritation at everything around her. Even the sound of her neighbor's TV felt like an attack. She didn't know it, but the emotional door had opened. And the spirit stepped in fully, quiet, determined, purposeful. All night she tossed in bed. All morning she felt drained. By noon, she avoided prayer completely, telling herself she wasn't in the mood. That was the trap. The Dark Kingdom never needed her to fall physically. They only needed her to shift emotionally. Because once the feelings lost stability, the spirit could begin its deeper work. A person with a peaceful mind can resist. A person with a storm in their chest often cannot. And this is how emotional warfare weakens spiritual defenses. It blurs discernment. It breaks routine. It reduces confidence. It turns prayer into effort instead of connection. It replaces faith with confusion. And this is the part many never understand. The emotional drop is rarely just a feeling. It is often the announcement of a spiritual presence. In the Dark Kingdom, emotional instability was treated like a crack in armor. A signal to move forward, a moment to increase pressure, a step toward the next stage. Ada's breakthrough came weeks later, but not before she realized a painful truth. Her emotions weren't changing because of life. They were changing because she was being watched and pushed. And many watching this right now will recognize that same pattern. The sudden mood change, the unexpected heaviness, the irritation with no trigger, the sadness that seems to strike out of nowhere. This is not weakness. This is warfare. and recognizing it early can stop the assignment before it grows stronger. Now that you understand emotional warfare, we can move to the next signal, the one that shows up in the atmosphere around a person long before they notice it. By the time a person begins to sense the fourth signal, the unseen world has already crossed deeper into their night. For some, this signal arrives quietly. For others, it arrives again and again, repeating the same scene until they finally pay attention. Disturbing dreams. Not the wild, chaotic kind that come from a busy day. These dreams follow a pattern. A woman once told me she kept seeing the same old house every night. A house she'd never visited. A house she didn't recognize. Yet she walked through its halls like she'd lived there before. Every dream, the same broken windows. The same long corridor. The same door she was too afraid to open. Another man described something different. He kept dreaming of water, rivers, oceans, flooding rooms, never drowning but never at peace. He would wake up with his heart racing, confused, because nothing in his waking life explained it. Others dream of walking backward, talking to people they cut off years ago, returning to places they left behind, running from a figure they can't identify, or finding themselves pulled into moments they thought they were free from. And yes, some face dreams that involve seduction or temptation, not in graphic detail, but in a way that leaves them ashamed, tired, and spiritually drained the next morning. These are not random. In the Dark Kingdom, dreams were valuable territory. A place where messages could be planted without resistance. A place where fear could be stirred gently. A place where a person's guard was weaker. Dreams act like a language. Heaven uses them to warn, guide, and strengthen. Darkness uses them to distract, confuse, and monitor. When I was deep in that life, I was taught that dreams were like windows. If you observed long enough, you saw a person's true condition. Their hidden fears, their unresolved battles, their spiritual noise, their open doors. We learned to influence dreams by watching which emotions triggered the most reaction. Fear, shame, loneliness, curiosity, desire. If a dream created fear, it weakened the person's confidence the next day. If the dream created shame, it pushed them away from prayer. If it created loneliness, it opened them to manipulation. If it created desire, it made them vulnerable to temptation. And if the dream created nothing, we sent it again. This is why dreams repeat. Not because your mind is malfunctioning, not because you dream too much, not because something is wrong with you psychologically. They repeat because the spiritual world received no answer. The enemy waits for a reaction, a prayer, a shift in your routine, a change in your spiritual posture, something that shows you recognize the pattern. If the dream pulls you backward night after night, they want you to think your past still owns you. If the dream involves water again and again, they want your emotions unsettled and your peace disturbed. If the dream brings you into dark houses or strange rooms, they want you to feel small, unsure, unsafe. If the dream is seductive, they want to weaken your purity and drain your authority. And if the dream places you in danger, being chased or hunted, they want fear to become the first thing you feel when you wake up. This is the part that people rarely understand. Dreams are not just images, they are interactions. They are attempts to influence, attempts to gain access, attempts to study your reactions, attempts to mark your spiritual temperature. That woman who saw the shadow at her door, she later confessed that weeks before the footsteps, she kept dreaming of walking through an empty house she couldn't recognize. Every night, the dream returned. The same corners, the same dim hallway, the same door she wouldn't open. Those dreams were monitoring her, watching her emotional patterns, preparing her for the night the shadow appeared. This is why the fourth signal matters so much, because for many people, this is the moment they first realize, something is trying to reach me. And if you ignore this signal long enough, the next one arrives with greater force. But if you respond early, with prayer, with awareness, with spiritual authority, you interrupt their cycle, and you shut the window before anything crosses through. And now we move to signal 5, a signal most people feel but rarely understand. There is a moment in spiritual warfare that almost everyone overlooks. It doesn't involve fear. It doesn't involve night encounters. It doesn't even involve the supernatural in a visible sense. It shows up in your day, when everything had been moving forward, and then suddenly everything stops. This is signal 5, strange delays and sudden blockages. In the Dark Kingdom, this was one of the most common operations, not because it harmed the body, but because it slowly suffocated a person's confidence, purpose, and direction. Let me explain how it works. When a target is marked and earlier signals haven't been recognized, spirits are sent to interfere with the flow of their life. They don't remove opportunities, they interrupt them. They create roadblocks and patterns, not single events. A person will wake up one morning excited about their progress. Their plans look solid, their energy is high, their path feels clear. And then, almost out of nowhere, calls stop coming in, promises are withdrawn, projects break apart for no reason, and the people who once understood them suddenly begin to misunderstand every word. It feels like the entire world shifted half an inch, just enough to work against them. In the kingdom of darkness, these blockages were crafted with precision, not chaos. Patterns. The goal was simple: frustrate the person until they question their assignment, exhaust them until they stop praying for clarity, break their rhythm until they lose momentum. I remember one case clearly. A young man, gifted, hardworking, deeply passionate about his calling. His life had been moving forward with unusual grace. Every door he knocked on opened. Every step he took seemed confirmed, until the marking. He didn't hear footsteps at night. He didn't experience shadows. He didn't have strange dreams. His battles showed up in his schedule. The first blockage came when an important meeting got canceled minutes before he arrived. No explanation. Just a cold apology and a promise to reschedule soon. A promise that never came. Then his business partner misheard simple instructions, causing a mistake that cost them a major deal. The mistake didn't make sense. The partner was someone who never missed details. 2 weeks later, an opportunity he had been praying for suddenly fell into someone else's hands. Someone who hadn't even applied for it. At first he blamed himself. Then he blamed the system. Then he blamed the people around him. He never once considered the spiritual realm. But I can tell you from the inside exactly what happened. A team had been assigned to him. One spirit influenced communication. Another created emotional friction in the people he needed. Another whispered doubt into his heart. And another waited for his frustration to grow strong enough that he would finally speak the sentence they wanted. Maybe this is not for me. That sentence was the real goal. Because spiritual warfare often isn't about destroying the person. It's about disconnecting them from their path. His delays were never random. His losses were never coincidences. His setbacks were never just life. They were engineered, timed, strategic. The moment he realized this was when he noticed a pattern. Every time he prayed with fire, something tried to slow him down. Every time he fasted, an interruption came. Every time he took a bold step, resistance increased. That was the clue. And the night he understood it, everything changed. He stopped blaming people. He stopped blaming himself. He shifted the battle to where the battle actually was. He prayed with authority. He declared God's order over his steps. He asked the Holy Spirit to expose every unseen interference. And slowly, the blockages lifted. Doors reopened. People returned with clarity. The flow came back. Because darkness can interrupt your journey, but it cannot stop what God has ordained, unless you surrender your confidence. Signal 5 is real. Strange delays, sudden blockages, opportunities slipping away without reason. Moments where everything freezes at the edge of breakthrough. These are not always life's natural rhythms. Sometimes, they are indicators that something is working against the path God placed before you. And those who understand this signal learn to stand firm, because the attack at this stage isn't about destroying your life, it's about stopping your destiny. Signal 6 is one most people ignore because it hides inside normal life. Relationship conflicts, out of nowhere, sharp, sudden, confusing. Arguments that appear without a real cause, words that wound deeper than the moment should allow, silence that feels colder than the weather outside. And here's the truth many never hear. Division is a powerful spiritual weapon. In the Dark Kingdom, it was one of the fastest ways to weaken a target. When a person stands alone, their mind becomes louder than their faith. Their fears multiply. Their confidence shrinks. Their spiritual defenses drop. And once isolation sets in, the rest of the attack becomes easier. I remember the case of a family we studied for months, a strong family, close-knit, prayerful. The kind of home that seemed unbreakable from the outside. But every house has a door if you watch long enough. It started with a small misunderstanding between the husband and wife. A single sentence taken the wrong way. Normally, they would have laughed about it, but that night, they didn't. The atmosphere changed. The wife felt hurt and didn't know why. The husband felt accused and couldn't explain the sudden tension. They both went quiet, each believing the other no longer understood them. That was the first crack. Then came the second. The children began sensing the atmosphere without knowing the cause. Their joy grew thin. Their voices became soft. The home that once carried warmth started to feel unfamiliar. And behind the scenes, the assignment team watched carefully. Our strategy was simple. Confuse the communication, twist intentions, magnify small offenses, turn whispers into wounds. The goal wasn't to make the family hate each other. It was to make them withdraw from each other. Silence is more dangerous than shouting. Distance is more dangerous than conflict. When hearts grow distant, it becomes easier to plant new thoughts, thoughts the person believes come from themselves. One night, the wife sat alone in the living room, staring at the wall, asking herself, "Why does it feel like my home is slipping away?" At the same moment, the husband sat in their bedroom wondering, "Why can't I fix this? Why does every word come out wrong?" And all the while, the atmosphere in the house grew heavy. Not loud, not violent, just heavy. Like peace had stepped outside for a moment and forgotten to return. I remember watching their pain and knowing exactly what was happening. They were being separated so they could be weakened, because once unity breaks, authority breaks. And once authority breaks, protection weakens. Division creates silence. Silence creates distance. Distance creates vulnerability. But here's what shook me even back then, while I was still deep inside the dark kingdom. This family wasn't destroyed. They were interrupted. The wife eventually felt a stirring, a small, desperate cry from her spirit, and she rose in the middle of the night with a single sentence, "Lord, something is wrong in my home." That one prayer, whispered quietly, changed everything. Because prayer restores what confusion tries to separate. Within days, the arguments lost their force. Within weeks, the house felt like itself again. Within months, the family grew stronger than before. Darkness tries to divide because it fears unity. It fears households that stand together. It fears people who fight side by side. Signal 6 is simple. Conflict that makes no sense. Distance that forms without reason. Tension that appears like a shadow between two people who love each other. If it feels unnatural, if it feels sudden, if it feels like something invisible is tugging at the bond, it may be more than a misunderstanding. It may be a strategy. Because the dark kingdom knows a divided target is easier to conquer than a united one. And this leads us to the seventh signal, the one that often reveals the attack has fully arrived. This final signal is the one almost everyone ignores, yet almost everyone experiences. And it is one I knew too well. It's the sudden heaviness, not the ordinary kind that comes after a long day, but the strange weight that falls the moment someone tries to pray. A person can scroll on their phone for an hour with full awareness, but the moment they kneel, the moment they lift their hands, the moment they whisper, "Father," a cloud covers their mind. Their thoughts slow, their eyelids drop, their breathing shifts, the entire atmosphere changes, as if something is pressing down on them from above. Most think it's just tiredness. But those of us who worked in the dark kingdom knew exactly what it was. We called it the suffocation strategy, because prayer, in the spiritual realm, is breath. Worship is breath. Scripture is breath. And if you cut off a person's breath, you cut off their strength. This tactic didn't require noise or fear. It required timing. Dark forces waited until a person was about to enter a spiritual moment. Not before work, not during daily tasks, only when the person reached out for God. That was the window. I remember watching teams assigned to believers who were growing stronger. We knew their patterns. We knew when worship would begin. We knew when their spirit was opening. And that is when the draining began. Not of energy, but of focus. That was the real target. If a believer cannot focus, their prayer loses sharpness. Their worship loses depth. Their mind drifts, and once the mind drifts, the spirit becomes quiet. The draining was subtle. A thought inserted at the wrong moment. A memory that suddenly appears. A wave of unexplained sadness. or the sudden urge to rest, even though the person was fine 5 minutes ago. I've seen this happen to strong men and women of faith, people who loved God, people who prayed with fire, people who studied Scripture deeply. They would lift their hands to pray and immediately feel as if something pushed them backward. That heaviness was designed. I confess this because I once participated in assignments like these. We mapped out the exact time a believer prayed the longest. We learned the hours their heart softened before God. We watched how they worshiped, how their voice changed when they entered the presence, and that was the moment we struck. Because that was the moment they were the most dangerous. Prayer was the place where attacks failed. Worship was the place where chains broke. Scripture was the place where lies melted. So the goal was simple. Don't stop the believer. Just weaken them enough that they stop themselves. If they close their Bible early, mission accomplished. If they shortened their prayer because the sleepiness felt too heavy, mission accomplished. If they told themselves, "I'll worship later," and never returned, the assignment moved forward. But here's what darkness never wanted exposed. That heaviness is not stronger than the believer. It only feels strong because it arrives at the exact moment of spiritual breakthrough. And the moment you recognize it, you break it. Because unusual fatigue during prayer isn't your body shutting down. It's the enemy trying to shut you down. And when you push through, even with one sentence, even with one whisper, even with one verse half spoken, you suffocate the very force that tried to suffocate you. Signal 7 completes the pattern. A pattern planned in shadows, but broken the moment a believer opens their mouth in faith. Now that all the signals are revealed, there's something you must know before we continue. The same God who sees attacks forming in silence is the God who gives victory in silence. And the next part of tonight's journey will show you exactly how. Now, step back for a moment. Look at the entire map. Across this journey, you've heard all 7 signals. 7 warnings the Dark Kingdom places over a person long before the visible battle begins. And now we stitch them together. Because none of them stand alone. Not one. The woman from the opening, the one who woke at 3 a.m. with footsteps outside her door, her story wasn't shaped by a single sign. It was shaped by a pattern, a sequence. The same sequence I once watched operate countless times while I was still in the wrong kingdom. It often starts with the first disturbance, that quiet shift in the atmosphere. Something feels off, but you can't say why. Then comes the pressure on the mind, like a weight you didn't invite, a heaviness that makes every simple task feel harder than it should. Soon after, the night interruptions begin, sleep breaks, dreams change. The body feels awake while the spirit feels observed. Then a withdrawal from prayer starts to form. Not rebellion, just a slow drifting. The heart wants to pray, but the strength is missing. Next comes the emotional trigger, a sudden sharp shift, anger, sadness, frustration, or fear, arriving for no clear reason. Then a pull toward isolation, the desire to be alone even when the person truly needs support. A silence that feels safer than speaking. And finally, the moment of encounter, a sound, a shadow, a presence, where the unseen world steps a little too close. 7 signals, 7 steps. But here's the part most people never understand. If 2 or more of these appear at once, the attack is no longer forming. It is already in motion. This is how the Dark Kingdom builds momentum. Each sign weakens something small. Each sign opens a tiny door. And when enough doors open at the same time, the assignment begins to tighten around a person's life. This is why darkness works slowly. So the person adjusts to each shift, thinking it's normal. Thinking it's stress, thinking it's just life, but I can tell you from experience, it is never just life. It is never accidental. It is never without intention. These 7 signals create a bridge, a pathway, a sequence designed to prepare the person for the final strike. Look at your own life for a moment. Look carefully. Have you noticed the pattern? 1 sign, 2, more? Because this is where the story you've been watching becomes personal. This is where knowledge turns into responsibility. The enemy moves quietly, but now you see the footprints. You recognize the timing. You understand the structure of the plan. And once you recognize a pattern, you have the authority to break it. That is the heart of Christian warfare. Awareness empowers victory. Discernment exposes deception. Light destroys every hidden work. This is why these signals mattered, why the story mattered, why the journey mattered. not to create fear, but to give you sight. Because when a believer gains sight, every plan of darkness loses its power. Now that you've seen the signs, you need to understand how they actually work, because nothing in the spirit world is random. Every attack follows a structure, a method, a sequence, a purpose. And the first place darkness aims is always the mind. I learned this years ago when I served on the wrong side of the war. The mind was the battlefield long before anything moved in the physical world. Why? Because the mind is where agreement begins. If a demon can't touch a person's mind, it can't touch their life. It can only observe from a distance. So the goal was simple: disturb the thoughts, insert suggestions, twist emotions just slightly, not enough to alarm, just enough to weaken. A confused mind becomes a quiet mind. A quiet mind becomes an unprotected mind. This is why the atmosphere around a person matters so much. Because spirits don't only observe thoughts, they respond to environments. A room filled with worship is hard to stand in. A room filled with anger or loneliness is easy to step into. Atmosphere is like the climate of the soul. Whatever fills the air, fills the space around the person. I remember being sent into a home once. There was no prayer there, no love, no unity, only silence, stress, and a lingering sadness that no one ever talked about. It was effortless to enter, because the atmosphere had already prepared the ground. But when the atmosphere resisted, when peace was present, when scripture had been spoken in that home, the assignment slowed down. Sometimes it even failed. And then there are dreams. Most people think dreams are recycling their day. But in spiritual warfare, dreams are message zones. They are the one place where the body is quiet enough for the spirit to listen. This is why so many attacks begin with strange dreams. A chase, a warning, a voice calling your name, a presence standing by your bed. Dreams reveal what the spirit is sensing even when the mind is not paying attention. For us back then, dreams were a doorway. Plant a symbol, plant a fear, plant a temptation, and if the person accepted it without prayer, the doorway stayed open. But one of the strongest tools we used was isolation. Not physical isolation, spiritual isolation. Cut a person off from counsel. Make them believe no one understands them. Convince them that speaking up is weakness. Push them into handling everything alone. Because isolation makes a person carry battles that were never meant to be fought by one person. And alone is where the enemy's voice sounds the loudest. I saw it many times. A believer would start strong, surrounded by community, lifting their hands in worship. Then slowly, a disappointment here, a misunderstanding there, a small wound in the heart, and they would step back. Stop sharing. Stop reaching out, stop asking for help. That was always the moment assignments succeeded. And then comes exhaustion. Exhaustion is more than being tired. It's when the body is awake but the spirit is drained. It's when prayer becomes short, rushed, distracted. When reading the Bible feels heavy, when worship feels far away. Exhaustion was the window we relied on the most, because a tired believer prays soft, a tired believer fights late, a tired believer doubts themselves, doubts their strength, doubts their place in God, and doubt is the entry point. That is why attacks don't begin with fear, they begin with weariness. Weariness lowers the shield, and with the shield down everything becomes accessible. This is the unseen structure. Mind first, atmosphere second, dreams as a gateway, isolation as pressure, exhaustion as the final opening. Not chaos, not randomness, a system. A dark system built to make a strong believer feel fragile, and a fragile believer feel alone. But once you understand this, once you see how the unseen works, you begin to realize something the kingdom of darkness hopes you never discover. A person who knows how the attack works can stop it before it begins. And that is where the real war turns. By now you understand how the attack begins, quietly, patiently, step by step. But here's the truth, the dark kingdom never wants anyone to discover. A silent attack can be stopped long before it reaches its final stage, long before fear arrives, long before the shadow stands at the door. The moment you sense something shifting in the atmosphere of your life, the moment distraction, exhaustion, and disconnection begin to rise, that is the moment to act. Let me guide you through what I wish someone had told me years ago. 1. Reclaim your focus. Immediately, focus is spiritual sight. When darkness tries to distract you, they are trying to blind you. You don't need long prayers to break the fog, just clarity. A simple line, spoken out loud, works like a sword. Lord, open my eyes. That one sentence has stopped more attacks than most people will ever know. Because the kingdom of darkness loses strength the moment a person becomes aware. 2. Reset the atmosphere of your home. Silent attacks grow in silence, so break the silence with something holy. A short worship song, a whispered verse, a prayer spoken while walking slowly through each room. You don't need to shout, you don't need to command the whole night, you only need to shift the atmosphere. When I was in the Dark Kingdom, I saw how this affected the teams sent against people. The moment someone reset their atmosphere, it was like the ground beneath us changed. Assignments slowed, access weakened, our influence thinned like smoke. 3. Strengthen your spirit before you sleep. Many attacks are timed for the hours when the body is weak and the mind is resting. So prepare your spirit before you close your eyes. A short scripture, a short prayer, a simple line of surrender. Lord, cover my night. King David used this rhythm. He often prayed before he slept and when he woke, trusting that God kept watch in the hours he couldn't. This is not a ritual, it's protection. 4. Speak against every invitation. Silent attacks often begin with thoughts that are not your own. When you notice a strange heaviness, an unusual fear, or a sudden discouragement, speak against it. Not with anger, not with fear, but with authority. I refuse every voice that is not from God. Say it once, clear and calm. This simple declaration closes every door the enemy hoped would stay open. 5. Ask God to restore what was drained. If distraction and exhaustion were used against you, then restoration becomes your weapon. Ask God to restore your peace, your focus, your strength, your joy, your connection to Him. You don't need perfect words, just honest ones. The kingdom of darkness hates restored people. A restored person becomes dangerous. 6. Don't fight alone. One of the greatest strategies used against targets is isolation. If you feel overwhelmed, reach out to a believer you trust. Ask them to pray with you or for you. Even Moses needed help when his arms became tired. Even Paul asked for prayer when he felt pressure. God never designed spiritual battles to be fought alone. 7. Stand in identity, not emotion. This is the final step, and it changes everything. A silent attack uses emotion as a weapon. Fear, confusion, loneliness. But spiritual authority is rooted in identity, not feeling. When you remember who you belong to, darkness loses its ground. Say it gently. Say it with certainty. I belong to God. In the Dark Kingdom, this was the sentence we feared most. Because the moment a person remembers who they are, the entire operation against them begins to collapse. Listen to me carefully. You are not outnumbered. You are not helpless. You are not standing alone in the night. A silent attack can be stopped. A spiritual mark can be erased. A weak moment can become a turning point. Victory does not require shouting. It requires awareness. It requires alignment. It requires the decision to stand, even when the night feels long. And the same God who watched over David while he slept, the same God who opened Peter's prison doors, the same God who protected Daniel when every plan was arranged against him, is the same God watching you now. This is your turning point. The moment the shadows lose their hold, the moment the night begins to break. Because once light enters, darkness has no choice but to leave. Before we close, I want you to take a quiet breath. Let your shoulders release, let your mind settle. For the last hour we have walked through shadows, but now we stand in the light. This is a simple prayer, a gentle declaration. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just truth, spoken with peace. Father, thank you for every moment of clarity you've given today. Thank you for the strength that rises quietly inside us, even when life feels heavy. Another breath. Tonight, I pray for this viewer. Let your peace rest on them like a soft cloak. Let their mind be calm. Let their spirit be steady. Let their heart return to the place where fear cannot speak. A pause. Almost like the room is listening with you. Where there has been confusion, bring clarity. Where there has been pressure, bring relief. Where there has been unease, bring stillness. The tone shifts gently, firm but tender. And every doorway that was opened against them, Lord, close it now. Every signal darkness tried to mark them with, erase it. Let them walk with a shield around their mind, a guard around their peace, and a light around their steps. A quiet breath, not rushed, not forced. Give them rest tonight, give them strength for tomorrow, and give them the awareness to recognize your voice above every other voice. And from this moment forward, let their life be surrounded, protected, and guided. Silence. Just a few seconds, to let the words settle like soft rain. May peace cover your home. May clarity fill your thoughts. May strength return to your spirit, and may every dark assignment sent toward you lose its power and lose its path. One final line, calm and full of hope. You are protected, you are held, you are not alone. The music fades, gentle, warm, like dawn slowly touching the horizon. You've heard the signals, you've seen the pattern. You've walked through the shadows where silent battles begin. But before this journey ends, I need to leave you with something every former servant of darkness wishes people understood sooner. Silent attacks only succeed when you ignore the signals. The enemy works quietly because awareness is your shield, understanding is your weapon, and discernment is the alarm that darkness fears the most. For years, I watched people step into danger simply because they thought nothing was happening. They believed silence meant safety. They believed the absence of noise meant the absence of war. But now, you know better. You know how deception is planted. You know how timing is studied. You know how the early signs appear in the corner of your life long before they try to reach the center. And because you know, the advantage is no longer theirs. This is the part the Dark Kingdom hates. Once a believer becomes aware, even slightly, the entire assignment begins to crumble. Because the enemy can study your weaknesses, but he cannot defeat your awareness. He cannot override your authority, and he cannot overpower the God who walks with you. So hear this clearly. You're not alone. You're not helpless. You're not exposed. Every attack you've ever faced, every night you felt watched, every moment you sensed something was wrong but couldn't explain it, you were never abandoned. God saw it. God was near. God kept the line of mercy open even when the pressure pressed against you. And now you have something the enemy cannot steal. Light. Not light as a feeling, light as a force, light as a kingdom, light as a weapon that reaches places your eyes cannot see. Because when light moves, darkness has no negotiation. It retreats, it collapses, it loses ground instantly. I've seen this with my own eyes. I've watched assignments fall apart the moment someone recognized the signal and spoke a simple, faith-filled prayer. I've watched fear lose its grip the moment someone called on the name of Jesus. I've watched entire cycles break when a believer finally stood up and said, "Enough." You may have been a target, but you are also a warrior. You may have walked through nights that felt endless, but the dawn was never far from you. And this is the truth the enemy never wanted you to hear. Every gate opened against you can be closed. Every mark placed on you can be erased. Every cycle formed around you can be broken. Because the power of God does not just protect, it restores. It lifts, it rewrites, it frees. You are not the same person who started this video. You now carry understanding, you carry clarity, you carry spiritual sight, and spiritual sight is victory. So as this chapter closes, let these final words settle in your spirit. Light is stronger, God is greater, and you have authority you've barely begun to use. Walk with courage, walk with awareness. Walk with the confidence that the one who goes before you is greater than anything that moves in the shadows. This is your final warning and your final hope. You are covered, you are guarded, you are backed by a kingdom that never sleeps, and no gate opened against you will remain standing. All the signals you've seen tonight, all the quiet steps, the cycles, the preparation, they were never random. They were invitations. Moments designed to test faith, to measure obedience, to find where the gates might open. But the gates do not have the final word. Every attack, every distraction, every moment of exhaustion or doubt can be resisted, can be shut down, can be burned away by prayer, by faith, by spiritual authority. Because the spirit inside you is alive. It watches, it knows, it acts before the enemy ever sets foot. So guard your heart, lift your hands in truth, declare God's name in every shadow. And remember this, above all else, pay attention to the signs. Your spirit always knows before your eyes ever see it.